What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Headless Giant podcast. I'm your host, Headless Giant, and I have two titans of the alternative research sphere joining me today. I've got Ryder Lee, raised by giants, and JJ Vance, not the president. Why don't you boys introduce yourselves, and then we'll talk about our topic.
Well, damn, this is three dudes wearing some sunglasses on a live stream. Hell yeah, boy. I'm Ryder Lee. I host a podcast called Raised by Giants on YouTube and any and all podcast platforms. I'm also a filmmaker and a documentarian. I think that's a word, documentarian. Have two documentaries on Amazon Prime, JFKX, Solving the Crime of the Century, and the brand new documentary, A Clockwork Shining.
I got to tell you, Ryder, you changed my dad's life. He's always looked into the topic of JFK for as long as I've been alive, and your documentary did it. It convinced him.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff that's going on there, and with no one really talks about JD Tippit that looked almost identical to JFK and was shot in the exact same places that JFK was shot. And he's a dead ringer for JFK. His nickname was even JFK on the Dallas police force. So it's either a really similar coincidence or something way more is going on with the whole assassination.
Absolutely. And JJ Vance, tell the people where they can find you.
Headless, appreciate the invite. Ryder, always great talking ancient alien cargo cults with you there, sir. JJ Vance, not the vice president. Do not vote for me in 2028. Host of Operation GCD podcast, live Wednesdays, Fridays. Do a lot of the epicenter of these parapolitics and cargo cults, and I'm a big fan of your JFK documentary there as well, Ryder. I know we did discussion on that at the Cult Rejects over there with Nick. It was a great conversation there. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I enjoy the things you all bring to light there in that film. And that situation is steeped in ancient alien cargo cult activity, right? With the folks preceding it, and a lot of the folks apparently involved in that, and one character being Carrie Thornley, one of these allegedly, according to Jim Garrison, the district attorney of New Orleans, the Oswald double. Well, I recently been getting more into the Thornley situation, seeing his connections to the Process Church there in New Orleans at the very same time. Some elements around the Garrison investigation revolving around the Process Church there at the very same time, including the suspect in the Garrison investigation being the attorney who incorporated the process, only one of many connections. But Kerry Thornley himself is from every branch of his family tree is from a pioneering Mormon family. So he's very deep in ancient alien cargo cult activity as a result of that. So he's an interesting character when you look at the epicenter of parapolitics and these ancient alien cargo cults throughout time. It never ceases to amaze me because that Thornley was a recent discovery of mine. I had no idea until very recently looking into some genealogy, but he's all up in that JFK situation as well, as far as, the spooky activity surrounding it.
Absolutely. Just for the audience, I want to go into a little bit of the basic definition of cargo cults. Now, during World War II, there were lots of really, really remote tribes that living on islands who then became host to the U.S. government. And so the U.S. government decided to bring all of their cargo, all their shipment, all of the stuff that they would need to, set up bases of operation in the South Pacific. And what ended up happening was after they left, the natives looked back on that time that they were there with all that cargo and all that stuff, and they started a religious movement based off of getting those Westerners to come back. And this became the John Frum cult. And John Frum was this character that they created that was very similar to Jesus, but also very American. And this John Frum character was the one in charge of all of these big ships and all of this cargo. And so they would pray to John Frum. And the John Frum cult became more of a archetypal cult. So it's still around today. You can still go to Vanuatu and see the cargo cults from World War II. And they're like, yeah, we know that you're not the guys that, we're worshiping here. This is more of a spiritual concept. So you can see each phase of how they transformed from, having sort of like this envy about all this stuff that we have to then, taking it to a spiritual level, and then taking it beyond the spiritual level into the archetypal level. And when you can see that in these cargo cults there, you can start to apply that to some of the cargo cults from Europe, early America, and all the rest of these sort of waiting for the ancient alien type cults to go on.
Yeah, and the question then becomes, how long has this been happening for, right? We know the World War II cargo cults, and then up into like into the Vietnam War cargo cults, because that was happening then too. But how far back through our history, ancient history, has that been going on? If it's happening in modern times, then it was definitely happening back then. I mean, it's just as easy happening back then as it happening now, right? So how much of our like fairy tales and like lore and legend has been steeped around the exact same type of situation that's going on with these cargo cults throughout history? I mean, all you need is a little bit more advanced civilization than other people around the earth that would go and visit them, and then they would think that they were like extraterrestrial beings. I mean, that's what they thought in the John Frum. They looked at John Frum as like a god when he was just a freaking U.S. military guy delivering goods.
Right?
Sure.
A good example of that is the ancient Greeks. They get a lot of credit as conquerors, but really most of what they did was just plant themselves down next to another civilization, and then that other civilization saw what they were doing, and they're like, well, we got to do something like that too. So they adopted the same gods, and they had this sort of cultural impact that was just from them being a little bit more advanced than their neighbors, and it basically changed the entire ancient world until about 0 AD.
That's right.
sure.
I mean, yeah.
For sure. And I would actually, in the same concepts as you're saying there, Ryder, as far as how far long does this go back in the timeline here, and what have these if you apply the same concepts of the ancient alien cargo cult in considering this historical perspective, it makes you wonder what how folks have made decisions, how some of these ideas have been formed over the years. Those are all very important. But I also look to take those same thought processes and apply them to the United States government, America. That is, we're an ancient alien cargo cult, and it makes me wonder the decisions we make as a government, because if you're applying these same concepts, right, they're making decisions, to achieve an ends that may not even be an ends that you can even achieve, right? The From John cult, they're in the Pacific Islands, they're doing rituals and dances, but that's not going to bring another C-130 down there, or dropping cargo on their island, right? So, I apply these same concepts to the way I look at some of the American history decisions and whatnot, because the American government, the secret society that started America, the Mormons, who were very much an offshoot of that, even this offshoot of the society, really, not just Freemasonry. These people are all steeped in these ancient alien cargo cult belief systems. So ultimately speaking, from a strategic level, at least, they're making decisions, contingent upon those belief systems, right? Whether it's trying to erupt themselves to another planet, whether it's other more socio-political, impact decisions. But these are the way I try to, the perspective I try to look at some of the, what impact have these cults had on even throughout world history, but also just American history.
Right. So a good example would be the 68th Convocation with the Rosecross Order, the Rosicrucians out of Pennsylvania. They've always sort of had their feet in this sort of place between worlds, kind of like this hermetic concept. And I believe that the Rosicrucians in Pennsylvania go back before the founding of the country with the cult of the woman in the wilderness. And
Sure.
if you look at the main guy for the cult of the woman in the wilderness, he looks like some kind of an alien gray figure. And this is the first portrait ever taken in the United States, they say. That's what its claim to fame is. But this guy really did maybe look a little bit like their gods. I mean, how long have they been doing the head binding and the all the rest of that stuff with the mummies in South America? They're trying to make them look like aliens, or at least the popular conception of aliens today. So why wouldn't that be still existing in the West as opposed to just the natives in the North and South American continents.
Well, I mean, you think of it like if you're secluded and like we have secluded people right now, like in the Amazon rainforest, like tribes of people that have never seen really any kind of life outside of their island. Okay. And that's crazy to think about in like this day and age that there are groups of people that don't know anything about civilization. Like we're here and we have all this technology and all this stuff, and they're living like back like cavemen. Okay. So if you take, let's just go back like 2,000 years or however long you want to make it, and those exact same people exist. Okay. And they never seen anybody outside of the people that they know on their island. This is just hyperbole, right? So a person that does not look like them is wearing different clothes. They have no idea who they are. They're going to mistake them for being some kind of god. And that's where I think that these Nordic ET depictions and stuff, like if you're of a completely different race and you've never seen somebody with white skin before and they show up on your island and they may be wearing all this gold and like all this jewelry, like a freaking ancient Egyptian or something, or you know, I'm sure we looked very different from a lot of these people, right? And you show up there, they're going to be like, "Oh my God, they came from the sky. They're the Nordic extraterrestrials for sure." And then they write about them, and then they draw them on their caves, and then it's the exact same thing, like with these cults, like with the cargo cults of like modern day and like the 1900s. You know, and then that gets spread out through mythology, and then that turns into something completely different 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, 1,000 years down the line. And then that's how we have established this mythology of like these races of extraterrestrial beings. They're not extraterrestrial beings, they're just people from other parts of the world that others didn't know that they even existed.
Right. There could be some sort of deep psychological kind of a subconscious thing going on with the image of the alien gray and something in our own consciousness that would make us see that sort of like all the time. You know, I mean, at least recently. I don't know how far back these people who have been seeing the alien grays are going, but there's definitely an uptick in all that stuff. I wanted to complete the thought for Tara Jackson. She's asking, wait, so there were men calling themselves women? So the woman in the wilderness refers to a group of German priests who settled in the Wissahickon Valley near Philadelphia in 1694, led by Johannes Kelpius. That's the guy who I was talking about. If you kind of look at that image right there,
right?
That's what they say is that was the first portrait ever taken in the United States, and that guy looks like a fucking gray. I mean,
1694.
1694, and he died at 40 years old. He was on the 40th parallel. It was a lot of 40s, and they were a end times type cult who believed that they
that's what I was going to say. Yep. You know, go ahead.
Well, that's the thing is like you get a lot of the mix between the ancient alien cargo cults and the end of the world cults.
They're always the same. They're always doing weird sex stuff, weird alien stuff, and the world's going to end tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
And the extraterrestrials are going to come and save us.
And what's interesting about that Wissahickon Valley is that is where the I Am cult started, is right there in that Wissahickon Valley in Philadelphia.
That's where it all started.
What's that?
That's where it all started for America, right? Because the Campbellite movement comes out of this region as well, right?
Yep.
I thought the I Am call started in Chicago.
Well, they've got one of their, I think that's their headquarters building right there. Michael Wan did an investigation out at this Wissahickon, and a bunch of these I Am cultists came out, and they're like, why don't you guys come on in? He didn't know what he was dealing with, but they talked him through the I Am spiel and everything.
Because that's where the Edna Ballard had a bookstore that kind of created their entire backbone of their cult, and then Guy Ballard went to California around the Mount Shasta, and that's where he claimed that he met Saint Germain, and Saint Germain gave him all these wisdom teachings, and then took him all over the world and had him meet the white hats in Washington D.C. that was going to take down the government, and going to have a government uprising, and then it was going to restore the currency, and that Saint Germain had this giant trust that everybody was going to get. It's essentially the Q. It's
Right.
the Q cult, before Q was even a thing. Like a long time ago. This is in the 30s that this the cult of I Am started, but other cults out of Chicago also popped up as well, which is the Seekers UFO cult with Dorothy Martin that started in 1953, which she had many predictions. That's another thing with all of the UFO cults as well, is that the UFO cults always have predictions that like never come true. Like that's one of the things.
The hallmark.
Hallmark of being a cult is that you got to make lots and lots of predictions that never happen, and then use different excuses as to the reason why it didn't happen. But the Seekers UFO cult,
Well,
more
one thing
attention
first
needs.
about the I Am cult and how they tie back into this whole sort of hermetic movement is this guy Saint Germain was supposed to be an alchemist. Some say he was a vampire, but the idea there is that he's like their connection to the past. So he's got all the memories that he's transmitting through them that sort of take them back to the ancient times, as well as their connection with whatever these new UFOs are. So it's kind of an interesting crossover there.
Yeah, and they actually ended up getting sued by a gentleman that
By an alien?
wrote a book called Dweller Between Two Planets, and they really ripped off like everybody. They ripped off Edgar Casey, Elena Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, this gentleman that I was talking about that wrote that book, and then they ended up getting into a lot of trouble with fraud as well. They were conducting a lot of mail fraud, like millions of dollars of mail fraud. They were sending in these pamphlets to people in the mail and telling them that they're going to ascend into the fifth dimension, and all their ailments and everything is going to be healed, and all the stuff that all that they needed to do was send them money.
You
So
got to
people were
finance
sending
that
in-
some way, right? That's not an easy dimensional leap, is it? That's going to cost some finances right there.
That's right. To do this work, you're going to have a lot of money.
gonna
You
need-
need a lot
yeah.
of money. Saint
Would you
Germain
say-
needs a lot of money.
Would you say that the I Am cult became the template that all the rest of the UFO cults kind of followed to some degree or another?
Yes, the influences can be seen throughout. It's literally the original ascended master teachings and the basis for the New Age community belief systems. I mean, how many people do we hear talking I am all the time in the spiritual New Age community? I am that I am. It's in the Bible, and they repeat that mantra over and over again. Do
Sure.
the mirror work, stand in front of the mirror and say, I am that I am. I am essentially God, right? And
Well, that's what it is, right? It's secular humanism, right? That's what it is. You nailed it. It's I am God. That's what the I am is, right?
Yeah, and it was also a patriotic cult. It was Christian based. They believed that Jesus was also an ascended master, and then other people throughout the years have like compiled upon that and said that Jesus is from Venus and Krishna is from Venus, and that their Venus is the love planet and all that, and then they came down from Venus. And that's another thing, is that Guy Ballard was also supposedly a psychic medium and like a hypnotist, like you were just mentioning, and they essentially got all of this information because Edna had an occult bookstore that she worked at. Forget what the name. I think it was the
No relation
Philosopher's
to
Nook or something like that. And she wrote.
what was it called?
The Philosopher's Nook.
Oh, that's a fancy name.
Yeah. But this took on like a life of its own, and like many people were influenced by this cult later on with that lady, shit, I'm blanking on her name. She was like the doomsday cultist that had the church that had the underground bunkers and everything in like the 90s. Elizabeth Clare Prophet.
There you go.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet basically took all of their teachings and then developed it into her own church, and she even had like a big picture of Saint Germain in the behind her whenever she was up there preaching and everything. So she basically took all of the I Am cult teachings. One of her relatives actually had access to all of their literature and like all of their work, so she just took all that and then created her own quasi Christian religious cult.
And then General Flynn took it from her.
That was more theosophy, right? I mean, it's almost the same, but right? Almost the same.
Right. Well, theosophy is a very much northwestern or northeastern United States movement. You know, you get a lot of influence of theosophy all over the East Coast, but I think the I Am cult definitely had a large, contribution from them.
You had the Manly P. Hall theosophical business going down there in Los Angeles, right?
Right, but you know, he kind of moved out there. But theosophy as a movement,
I'm saying it became a hub. That library and the research center and stuff out there became a hub, right? Like a major hub. Like Kenneth Anger would hang out there a lot, apparently.
Yeah, that LA center has been really kind of. I've heard people mention that on like entertainment TV shows for years. It's like that's where I go. That's my spiritual center. So it is.
Yeah,
it is
Double Sirhan went there.
Yep.
Sirhan's.
Oh, good old Sirhan's. But so much of the stuff, like even like the twin flame stuff, all comes from the cult of I Am. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the twin flame cult. Netflix did a huge docu-series on the twin flame cult where it's insane. I probably need to do a video on that cult. Because
I'm not familiar with that one now.
Well, they essentially, it's like, you know what a twin flame is. Well, what they call what a twin flame is like whenever you're reincarnated, your soul is separated into another being or another person, and then whenever like you're only meant to be with that person. So like you got to go out and search and look for your other half, your twin flame. Well, the cult of I Am had that same type of concept, but they called it twin rays. Okay, so then later on, with the Heaven's Gate cult, that's what they kind of got into as well, with the, the androgynous nature and, making everyone dress the same, eat the same things, have the same, and change the meanings and the names of words to fit their cult. But the twin flame cult is so they essentially, it's a newer cult. It started in like 2020, I think, or maybe a little bit earlier.
I've never heard of it. Yeah,
it was maybe a little bit earlier than that. But they would essentially like have like this group of people that were involved in this cult, and then they would essentially pair them all up together and like make them believe that they're supposed to be with that person.
Oh, that's a great mind control tactic, right?
That's exactly what it is. And they ended up getting super rich, having millions of dollars and like all this stuff, because, that's what people want. People want meaning, and people want to have answers. And whenever they put their trust in these people that have no idea what they're doing, then they easily fall for whatever it is that they're saying. And the I Am cult also had this thing called Violet Flame. So much of the stuff, like it can all be traced back to the cult of I Am, and I really think that more people need to look into the cult of I Am, and because when you do, you realize that one, a lot of the stuff is complete and utter garbage that has been tossed around today, and two, you realize like where the source of the information is coming from, and a lot of it comes, the New Age stuff comes from this cult of I Am. But really quickly, I've been talking for a second, but the Seekers UFO cult is really important, and that's another cult that really needs to be dissected and examined. And it was
that was Chicago.
That was also in Chicago, and it was headed up by this lady named Dorothy Martin and George Loghead. So some psychiatrist infiltrated into the cult and to examine like how they were going to react whenever their predictions didn't come true. Like what I was mentioning earlier, they always got to have predictions that never come true. So some psychologists infiltrated in, cozied up to the people, and then they wanted to examine them for whenever like their predictions didn't come true and how they handled that and what excuses they used to come up with that would explain why their prediction failed.
Was this psychologist government connected in any way, shape, or form? Because it sounds like it.
I am blanking on his name. I can't remember his name. I got a lot of stuff to remember in my head.
You mean to tell me, Ryder, that the world did not end December 21st, 1954?
That's what they say. That's what they predicted. And then when that didn't happen, they moved it up a couple of days. And then when that one didn't happen, they moved it out a couple of years. But the psychologist, I would have to look more into the psychologist, but I would be guessing that he was at least government funded. I mean, most psychologists are at least working for some kind of college, which is in turn funded by the government. So he infiltrated in.
What psychologists aren't funded by the government, if you really think about it, right? That's a good point you bring up there.
All of them, yeah.
Right.
So whenever they got in there, they developed the term cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance literally came from this psychologist examining this UFO cult. And I was talking about this back 2 to 3 years ago, and someone brought that up on one of these Netflix documentary series of unexplained mysteries or whatever when it's revolving around cults. And I was like, this dude watched my series on these UFO cults, because I have a giant series on them, like a playlist on my channel of like, I think 14 episodes of all these UFO cults, but I had never heard anyone ever mention that before until I mentioned it, and then it was mentioned on this Netflix documentary, but they didn't go into it like, super deep. And it's just so interesting that the term cognitive dissonance was basically formed while studying this UFO group, and now the people that are in this community and is a part of ufology use it to describe people that don't believe or that don't that are all mainstream. They're like, oh, you got cognitive dissonance. You don't know what you're talking about, right? It's just so interesting, but I digress.
Well, it's a big part of the whole conspiracy culture today is to accuse people of cognitive dissonance when they're faced with something that doesn't match their reality. And I think, it's funny the way that these things migrate, So at first it was the fringe or the mainstream making the allegation of cognitive dissonance against the fringe, and now it's the fringe making the accusation of cognitive dissonance against the mainstream. So you've kind of got a reverse of polarities when it comes to these different ways of seeing the world.
Yeah, I agree. I just looked up his name. His name's Leon Fetzinger.
It's quite a name.
Yeah.
I had a little cargo I wanted to share real quick. So this is the Prince Philip movement, a tribe in the South Pacific island of Tanna Vanuatu, which previously worshipped Prince Philip as a god, is expected to transfer their allegiance to Prince Charles following Prince Philip's death. This shift in veneration is due to Prince Charles's visit to Vanuatu in 2018, where he was given a grass skirt and a garland and was appointed an honorary chief. So he actually made his way out there to visit the people who are worshiping him.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
They're worshiping these people still to this day.
Yeah, I just looked at pictures. They have framed photographs of them and stuff. It's hilarious.
This doesn't stop, and I guarantee you there's so many of these world leaders that would like nothing more than to have a cult that follows their every word.
Oh, for sure. Well, when you were talking about how all this stuff erupted in America and how I was referencing the secret society that started America has these ancient alien cargo cult belief systems, and then they would spawn the Mormons, right? At least in large part with Joseph Smith and a lot of the early members. For example, Joseph Smith's grandfather was a captain in the Massachusetts chapter of the Society of Cincinnati, one of the original officers in Washington's army there. And he would start the Mormon Church in Fayette, New York, which is named after General Lafayette, the French head of the Society of Cincinnati. And they, deep in mound business, including the golden plates and the mounds, etc. But what's interesting is while he's doing that business, migrating in the late 1820s, you have a movement kicking off, and he's coming across New York, and he ends up meeting up with some of these folks in Kirtland, Ohio. But you have a separate migration of these same belief systems coming from in and around that area of Philadelphia with the Campbellite movement. And in fact, one of the major figures in that movement was a guy by the name of Sidney Rigdon, and basically all of the early Mormons that Joseph Smith had recruited by the time they got to Kirtland, Ohio, were all Sidney Rigdon's congregation from one of these Campbellite churches. And it's a very apocalyptic situation. They would spawn again mashed together with the Mormons, but they would spawn the Millerites, which would spawn the Jehovah's Witnesses. And all of these people are declaring the end of the world, right? And when it doesn't happen, it seems like then that old leader's out, the new leader's in, and they have a new movement, right? That goes from the Millerites to the Jehovah's Witnesses and et cetera, when they get the dates wrong, right? But it all seems to erupt around this one geographical area, as you were pointing out with that gray-looking fella.
And what's interesting, too, is if you look at a demographic map of the United States, you see that there aren't a lot of pockets of British bloodlines in the United States other than New England and Utah. Utah is nothing but, Anglo-Saxon British people. So it's kind of interesting when you follow those families, you got that
Carrie Thornley
over there.
All of Carrie Thornley's pioneering Mormon families all got recruited in England, and they all came over and migrated west.
So there are deep ties that I think that goes back in these family lineages a lot more than people give it credit for, because you think of Joseph Smith as some sort of poor farmer guy, but he was not.
No, not at all. But he did have an ancient alien cargo cult belief system, it seems, right? Steeped in magic and all sorts of weird sexual activities that they would later write off as simply as polygamy.
That's interesting. So do you think you're required to have more than one wife or engage in orgies if you're ever going to see the aliens?
Well, I suspect that still goes on today, if that's what you're asking. Sure.
Take note.
You got to be having sex with everybody, bro. That's the top thing of a cult, dude. You gotta be taking everyone's wives, and then you gotta try and convince them that abstinence is of a godly order, that God wants you to be abstinent. So then the leader can go around and sleep with everyone's wives.
Kind of goes back to John D. a little bit, don't you think?
Absolutely.
You got to swap wives, baby. That's the only way we're going to get the information from the fucking Nordic aliens, bro.
Weren't they talking to aliens?
Well, even Heaven's Gate's a sex cult, right? They're lopping their dicks off there, it's not they're having sex cult, but it's a sexual oriented cult, right? They went eunuch style with their sex cult operation, right?
They were trying to make themselves into grays.
That's why I think Marshall Applewhite was just super closet gay, and he was ashamed of being gay. So then he convinced people and his followers to get chemically castrated.
But I mean, it was more than that, because they had the whole brainwashing thing down.
Yeah.
So you had to be smooth-brained and smooth-crotched to really fit into the Marshall Applewhite cult.
Yeah.
For sure. Oh, for sure. And I do think a lot of this stuff is far more, we're pointing out some more recent elements with Heaven's Gate, but I think it's far more widespread than is publicly known. For example, when you consider things like why is an ancient alien cargo cult filled, why is the cast of a show about ancient aliens, a fictional show, Smallville, about, this ancient alien Superman who came from this foreign planet with all these superpowers, right? I would argue all these DC comics or Marvel are both Thelemic and Scientology fan fiction, but that's, as in like Marvel, Jack Parsons, Marvel Comics, his Suicide Squad, DC Comics Suicide Squad, right? So anyhow, but you see when you see these the whole cast of a show like this, of the Smallville, based upon these ancient alien, probably thelemic fan fiction situations. It makes me wonder, why is this whole Nexium cult on that cast? Why is this ancient alien cargo cult the cast of this show about this whole ancient alien cargo cult belief system?
Right. Well, in that case, I think I would probably go for they were targeting this cast. They wanted to bring that kind of energy into their group.
Well, I would look at it this way. I mean, that's one way to look at it. I would look at it this way: is how organized is this effort? How how long did they plan? You know what I mean? Was this like, because I think Scientology, they do, like, they're obviously a pretty infamous ancient alien cargo cult, right? With their whole Xenu and belief system, whatnot, but the prison planet, etc. But the they obviously get credit for films like Battlefield Earth, right, where they're telling the story of their kind of their philosophy, right, as L. Ron Hubbard would put it in his book Battlefield Earth. And it stars prominent Scientologists. You got John Travolta, you got Barry Pepper, right? They thought he was going to be a big star for him. Well, they do other films I don't think they get credit for. You look at a film like Enemy of the State, it's full of Scientologists, right? So, I think there are these efforts, when I say full of Scientologists: Will Smith, Jason Lee, Jack Black, Bodie Elfman, Barry Pepper, and the guy I was just talking about. There's a lot of Scientologists in there, right? So,
Did you see,
I think I think there are organized efforts with these cults, right? And I think Smallville might have been one of those.
Did you see the big giveaway that they had in Enemy of the State? The main guy, the NSA head,
John Voight.
John Voight. They looked up his file on the hacker's computer, right?
Right.
And it says his birth date was 9/11/44.
Oh, okay.
And that was another 1999 movie that had a reference to 2001.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's a lot of esoteric understanding of that film for sure. It's in my opinion, it's a Scientology film, but it's it's an effort. It's another example where they you see all these. It's not just Battlefield Earth. In my opinion, every actor who's done a Marvel or DC film as a star is a member of one of these ancient alien cargo cults. For another example, Wesley Snipes used all of his Blade money, and he produced the Blade films and starred in them, right, with this production company. That production company he used to finance an ancient alien cargo cult down in Merle, Georgia, where he built a bunch of ancient pyramid city on 400 acres, and they had this whole ancient alien belief system. They built it on these mounds, always with the mounds, and he financed that with the Blade money. So if technically speaking, I mean, I guess I'm guilty of this too. But technically speaking, if you went and saw the Blade films, you technically contributed to child sex trafficking, because that cult was also child sex trafficking, and the leader of which sits in prison today in Florence Supermax, and that's why they got all Wesley for the tax evasion over those same films.
Because they couldn't get him for anything else.
Exactly, yes, sir. They got him with the Al Capone, the prosecution, as I like to call it.
Yeah, that's a classic technique.
Do you remember the name of that cult? Because I think it had something similar to the other one.
So this is the New Wabian Nation. They're an interesting bunch because they're an official recognized lodge of the Prince Hall Freemasonry as well. Dwight York was their grand poobah or whatever they call it. I don't know.
But they still got that building in Brooklyn, right?
They're very well financed still. Yeah, they destroyed the entire ancient Egyptian city on the mounds. That's gone. Some of their local adherents may or may not have committed a ritual human sacrifice of an elderly white couple on a mound in the years subsequent to that destruction. So there's a lot of back and forth still going on, it seems.
Yeah, and the cops seem clueless about it.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Never. I don't even know what you're talking about. That's their story, right?
It's pathetic. I mean, some of these cop stories is just. I mean, it's getting more ridiculous. Like you were talking about with the Idaho 4, the judge had to pronounce, "Hey guys, no more secrecy," because it was just too dirty for him to even stomach.
Oh, it's gotten out of control. The train has left the track. Breach for impact in that case for sure. It's a shit show. So I have this kind of generalized theory, Ryder, that all of these, when you're saying that all of these things go back to I am, right? Like, and they have these, theosophical I am kind of, basis to a lot of these, all these ancient alien cargo cults. Mormons included, obviously share a lot of things with them, despite, wherever they get their ideas from. I have a lot of suggestions because, again, it's the founding fathers that they built these ideas from, by a guy like Elias Boudinot, one of the founding fathers, member of the Society of Cincinnati. He wrote a lot of these ideas that the belief systems of the Mormons in a book before, years before Joseph Smith. So, and again, Joseph Smith being of these same people, these are another example of these ancient alien cargo cult systems, but it all seemed would later at least agree with these I am and theosophical movements and work hand in hand, because the second president of the Theosophical Society was a member of the Society of Cincinnati, a guy by the name of Abner Doubleday, the guy who allegedly invented baseball. And if you notice that game, it's focused around a mound. Just saying. So, I have this theory. Was you're saying that they have these philosophical agreements, like, that I have this theory that all of these organizations are just working together, and they're going to come together like Voltron. You know what I mean? Like, we view them as separate organizations, but like at the top of their organizations, like, they all know. You know what I mean? Like, they all know.
Okay, so the Mormon Church was founded in, when was it founded?
1830.
Yeah,
I thought it was
1830.
No, 1830. Yeah, 1830. April 1830. April 6, 1830.
Yeah, it was yeah, it is 1830. So, but it didn't become. They didn't move to Utah until, well, they didn't have their migration to Utah until 1840s, and then they didn't really start becoming widely popularized until like the like after World War II. So that puts them. I mean, I'm sure that they had their thoughts and their ideas, but not large cultural influence until like after
I don't
World
know.
War II.
I don't know. I mean,
there's a
what are we
lot
calling
going
cultural
on.
influence as far as population wise, or?
You
Well,
gotta
the
go
cult
for
of I am had thousands and thousands of people, like already, like right after they formed the cult in the early 30s. Like they were going on like tours and speaking to thousands of people in giant auditoriums, like all over the United States. I just want
I
to
see what
know
you're saying by
because
total volume wise, right? You're saying it's total volume wise. I was thinking by the influential folks who were involved in the movement, right?
right.
right. Yeah. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure that they both like borrowed from each other and they both kind of like took from it, because that's a classic thing from like all these cults. Like they just went around and figured out, like they would go to spiritual centers, they would go to churches, they would go to Catholic churches, they would
for
go to
sure.
wherever, any spiritual centers, gurus, and they would like talk to like all these people to like cultivate their own ideas and wrap in all their stuff for the forming the basis of their cult. So
Match them in
definitely
the burrito, right? The UFO burrito.
yeah, the freaking cult UFO burrito, dude. That's what it is, and yeah, for sure that they definitely got into Mormonism as well. And whenever you're exchanging ideas like that, just like I learned from you guys learn from me, and then we kind of, cultivate our own ideas, and it brings up new things, right? So definitely, they had to have been, in contact with each other and talking with each other in order to further there. And I'm sure they both took ideas from each other as well. I mean, that's the way that it works.
That's how the UFO burrito system works. Now,
That's
I for
right.
sure, I think Abner Doubleday is that character of like the epicenter of those agreements, right? Like, he's the guy who, right? Like I was saying, the Mormon, all the upper Mormons and original Mormons, these are all society guys. They base their philosophies off of books written by society members of Society of Cincinnati, that is. So, while it's attributed to Freemasonry going underground, to me, it's the Society of Cincinnati belief system. Some of these folks happen to be Freemasons. They went underground at the same time and formed the Mormon Church to put a religious stamp on religious freedom at a time when Masonry was being prosecuted. They didn't want to get wrapped up in that. And again, while some of them were Masons, the real storyline is they were Society of Cincinnati men. So, and it's when I say that those things intersect, I think they later intersect when you see the Society of Cincinnati guy, Abner Doubleday, being the president of the Theosophical Society, right?
But then also you have to think like how much of the Mormonism ideology was actually out there for the public to actually understand. Like, did you actually have to convert to be a Mormon in order to actually understand their entire belief systems back then? Like, not now.
Right.
Like now you can get on the internet and like search up like all the Mormon belief systems, and if they come to your door, they'll hand you a pamphlet that gives you their basic outline of their religious philosophy. But how much of that was actually widely known back whenever they were first like starting up? And did you have to be a part of the church, kind of like Scientology? Like, did you
It's exactly like Scientology.
again, not like now. Like now, you can figure out more things about Scientology and their belief systems. But back even 40, 50 years ago,
Ryder.
nobody knew anything about it. You had to pay money to the Scientologist church to get in there to figure out the belief system and rise up through the ranks. Now with the Cult of I Am, they were essentially out there doing like big, huge seminars. So you didn't even have to be a part of the I Am cult to get to know the ideology of the I Am cult. Like you could just be like a regular person off the street that receives a pamphlet from the Cult of I Am that's going to do one of these traveling seminars, and you show up to the auditorium and then you essentially hear all about it. So it's like this.
I see what you're saying. No, I see what you're saying. But when you were saying they're like Scientology, I think that's a good correlation with the way Mormons approach their PR game, right? So like, but all these cults have a strong PR game, right? But yeah, you bring up a good point. I don't know how much you could learn about the Mormon Church back, let's say the 1830s through even the 1930s, like you're saying, with even just periodicals. But I do know their missionary game was top notch.
The JWs and Mormons, they were always top.
Yeah, JWs as well. Yeah, they'll knock on your door. They'll say hello. The word tie. Well, yeah. So when Joseph Smith was murdered, he had already dispatched not just missionaries but diplomats around the world saying that he was going to be the U.S. president. So, he had I don't know to the extent in which people could learn unless you met with them. I don't know what their periodical game was like back then, right? And their publications, but yeah, obviously the golden era of these cults definitely erupted at the time when I Am was, riding that way for sure, right? They definitely went on that PR tour, right? Where the Mormons weren't going on by the 1930s. The Mormons were not. That was not into their operations of PR. So, you know what I mean?
It can't be stated enough how much of an impact Rotary International has had on local communities all across the country. And that is basically like the Mormon Church's effort to marshal all the forces of these different churches into a single unit. And they sort of switch out which church runs the Rotary Club, but it's all the same sort of religious figures. Yeah. Between all these different churches coming together at the Rotary Club to plan their strategies.
And that might be what was going on with the Cult of I Am too. Maybe they were working quasi with the Mormons, and then they knew that the I Am cult thing was going to eventually collapse because it was unsustainable, and they were going to get sued for fraud and mail fraud, and they were doing all this ridiculous stuff. So what happens to all of those followers of that cult whenever it completely collapses and destroys? Well, they're going to go look for something that is similar to their belief system. So the Mormons could have grown their congregation just by the members, the I Am cult essentially being disbanded, and then they all flock to Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever seems like it's most similar or has the same type of structure as the religion or cult that they were in before.
See, that's the thing about the process.
It's funny you say that.
They seem like cult groupies, the process church. It's like, that's all they want to do is they just want to hang out with and be with cults all the time.
Well, I'm glad both of you gents brought up these points, because that is exactly what goes on. I have no doubt the mothership in Salt Lake City has a whole department trying to recruit out of these other cults or even try to end these other cults, right? Like it's, cult warfare, right? But there was a fellow who was raised by the process church, and he's now a Mormon bishop.
Oh, and I saw this video, not to interrupt you, just really quickly.
No, that was it. I just
okay.
that point is always wild to me, right? You get raised by the Protestant church, now you're a Mormon bishop, right?
That's that. They're all like interchangeable, right?
Right.
I listened to this video yesterday, which I can't speak to the validity of it, but it was an older video of this gentleman talking about how he became a priestess for the Satanic Church. Okay, which
Nice.
again, I don't know if it's real. I don't know if this guy is legitimate or whatever, but he essentially said the process of how he became a priest for the Satanic Church. He said at first he had to join a Freemason organization. Then whenever he rose up through the ranks of the Freemason organization, then he had to become a Catholic priest. Okay, so then after he became a Catholic priest, after rising up through the ranks of Freemasonry, then he was able to become a Satanic Church priest.
Wandering bishop.
That's exactly what I was thinking, dude. Wandering bishops, holy smokes, dude. That's exactly. I was like, wait a second.
Do you know about the wandering bishop?
That provides so much. That provides so much impetus behind the wandering bishop movement that just being a regular spook movement doesn't completely justify.
Knights of Malta as well. I mean, they're all wandering bishops in the Knights of Malta. They've got.
No, dude, that's wild. I never really considered that way. David Ferry. All of those dudes in the JFK situation, right?
Completely off the hook for any crimes they commit in the United States.
Well, yeah, but it gives excuse why they're going after those credentials, right? Why they want those bona fides. The one of these, I don't know how. I grew up Mormon, so whatever they do, one of these, stamp some stuff. I don't know how they do these things.
That's all they do.
But I know that it's very important, the lineage of that hierarchy of your priesthood or whatever, and those dudes were always all about that stuff within this wandering bishop stuff.
Do you know about that, Ryder?
I don't know anything about the wandering bishop.
This is great. So the Vatican extends to you sort of diplomatic status as a bishop, even though you're sort of separated from their organization. So now
is this where they get in trouble and then they just send them to a different church? Yeah.
Pretty much.
I do know about that. I didn't know that was the name of it. Yeah.
Well, wandering bishops are like another form removed from that. So they're not even really associated with the Vatican directly. So they've got some sort of deniability. But
plausible deniability, got to have that.
Yeah.
And so you've also got the Knights of Malta, which used to be the Knights Hospitalier. So they're over 800 years old. They also call themselves the Knights of St. John. But they have diplomatic immunity as well for the entire organization. And there are so many fucking Knights of Malta all over any of these conspiracies around JFK, around all this stuff. 100%
the Trump administration is chock full of Knights of Malta.
Well, it's just so interesting that you would need to become a Catholic priest before you're able to become a priest for the Satanic Church. Like, so, like, what are all these Catholic priests really doing? You know what I mean? And what is what exactly is the Catholic Church? I mean, when you look at like freaking midnight mass, dude, it's pretty freaking satanic, bro.
Right. Well,
so we're talking
and what are they actually doing in these churches whenever they're like not in operation? Because a lot of the old school Catholic priests would like live in a rectory, like like are they doing like satanic rituals inside of the church whenever the church isn't open for regular mass? Who knows?
Well, there is the link between
got to use that space, right? You got to make use of your time.
Sabbatean Frankism. Right? Everybody focuses on Sabbatai Zevi, but hardly anybody focuses on Jacob Frank, who infiltrated the Catholic Church. And he was specifically an antinomian along the same lines as Satanism.
Yeah, and that's like Sabbatean Frankism, huh?
Right.
They definitely like ritual human sacrifice within those elements, from my understanding.
But in some ways, I see the church as needing that. Right? The only way that you can progress history towards your eschatology is by controlling the negative forces or the evil forces. That's why I think the process church is so important, is because that's their theology.
Did the aliens tell you? Did the aliens tell you to say this?
No.
Is this message just from the aliens?
Not yet. I can get to the aliens. They're out there.
Well, there's a guy that floats around the interwebs today, or may not have ever existed, who the Church of the Subgenius. I know Ryder's done some shows on them as well.
Classic.
Bob Dobbs, he takes messages from aliens, an alien named Ion.
That's the most fun of all of the ancient alien cargo cults. And as far as I know, they're
Really,
not
Church of the
that
Subgenius. I know they play it off as fun. I don't. I take them just as I take Kerry Thornley's Discordianism. Which Subgenius is kind of an offshoot of that. Robert Anton Wilson and Kerry Thornley were both part of that movement. So,
bad. Have you
I could
watched
look at
their
him very much the same way. But Bob Dobbs is allegedly never existed. Although I tell you, I think I would disagree. But yeah, he
have you
takes messages
watched
from Ion. Apparently, I don't know what that's about.
they've got a movie on YouTube. It's the Church of the Subgenius movie, and it is fucking phenomenal.
Oh crap! I
Yeah.
haven't seen that. I have
It's
to
like
watch that.
it's like an hour and a half of nothing but brainwashing. It's just like brainwashing
Oh,
aesthetic everywhere.
is Pee Wee Herman in it? He was a member.
Probably they've got everybody. They've got the main preacher characters and all the rest. The whole thing was like a big stage show. It was really a lot more like theater than it was.
Yeah, that's
But
what they
it was
want.
like a theater.
That's what Ion the alien wants you to believe, Headless. These are the messages Ion's trying to deceive you.
But you could see a lot of influences that came out of them, like Guar. I think Guar copied a lot from Church of the Subgenius. So, Guar was like
Devo,
80s. Devo, there you go.
lead singer, was a prominent member of the Church of the Subgenius, if I'm not mistaken. You can look at their whole shtick, and that's kind of the whole Church of the Subgenius kind of philosophy, right? Their weird kind of kooky nature.
Absolutely.
But again, that's what Ion wants you to believe.
I've heard interviews with the guy who
With
created
Ion?
The guy who created it said that he was just flipping through a bunch of Freemasonic
Wait
books that his father had.
Wait a
so
second.
in these Freemasonic books, he's like, yeah, I could do something with this. So he just took all these Freemasonic ideas and then mashed it together with UFO cults and mashed it together with 1950s aesthetic. And that's what he claims the J.R. Bob Dobbs cult came out of. But
Yeah, wait a second here. This sounds like a message directly from Ion. So this fellow you're talking about, is this Ivan Strang? This
Yeah.
you're talking about? The individual known as Ivan Strang. So that's what I'm saying. He reports a storyline that Bob Dobbs never existed. I assure you, Bob Dobbs does exist. Like Waterworld. Water does exist. I've seen it.
Dude, that
You
is
can go
the
to a
most
website
bizarre
called
take.
You can go to a website called bobandion.com and see for yourself Bob exists. Right? And
Okay.
Ion being the alien in which he takes all of his messages from. Those messages, I think, are the ones that Ivan Strang is purporting that you're claiming right there, Headless, in my opinion. I actually grokked it recently on the AI on Twixter. I said, did Bob Dobbs exist? Or who was Bob Dobbs? And he gave me the same narrative you just fed me. I think Grok is being deceived by Ion as well. Bob Dobbs does exist. He has a website. I mean, I don't know what this whole Ivan's. I've heard the bit you're talking about with Ivan String. I'm like, I don't buy it because I've seen it. The guy has his own website. He's a real dude.
Dude, well, I mean, they took him out of a catalog. That's the original image. Is they took this picture out of a catalog and they're like, we're going to use this image as J.R. Bob Dobbs. And they just start making masks and stuff. But
yeah,
you're telling me that it's a real guy and he exists. Is this an alternate timeline?
This is real life. So what you're saying is right. They took that 1950s telephone book, Yellow Pages character, and they kind of stylized it a little bit, right? Folks of the interwebs can see that on the album or the disc cover, not the album cover. The disc cover of Sublime's 40 Ounces to Freedom. That's Bob Dobbs.
Right.
So, yeah, this idea, that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to buy into Ion's propaganda. I've already left the mothership with the Mormons. I'm not going to start subscribing to Ion's nonsense now. I can see a whole other shenanigans outside of these. Oh, we're just a friendly group. We're just a bunch of nice Mormons knocking on your door. We got some ties on. It's the same. It's the same shtick. It's the it's slightly more technologically advanced and culturally advanced, but it's the same shtick,
You're saying it's the same kind of cult under 2 or 3 layers of irony, and they're using the irony as bait to get you into their cult.
1,000,000%, sir. Yes. And all of these cults are going to come together like Voltron. I'm only halfway kidding when I say these things, but they all do the same things. The I am, the theosophical stuff.
That's what he based it on. Like in the interviews, he said, I wanted to make it as culty as possible.
Yeah, that's what Ion wants. Well, I mean, of course he's going to say that.
Ion, the old knowing God. But see, the thing about the Church of the Subgenius, it really had like this cultural impact upon the followers as well, because they were essentially told to like sit back and do nothing, right? That was one of the first types of cults that, like, I think, what did they call it? Slack? I think they called it
Slack,
slack.
yeah. Slack.
Like, you gotta have slack. Like, you don't do anything. Like, everything's gonna be essentially handed to you, and you just do nothing. Like, you don't. Like, and that's sort of the exact same kind of rhetoric with the I am cult. That's the exact same kind of rhetoric with the QAnon cult. Like, sit back, do nothing. The
Trust the plan.
trust the plan. Like, all these other people are going to take care of it for you. You don't need to do nothing but listen to this Q post. You know.
Sounds like
That's
something
fucking
Ion
great.
would say.
So you just roasted the shit out of Gen Xers. Basically called them a bunch of, trust the plan QAnoners. That doesn't play out well for Gen X. Because Gen X loved that shit, you know? I mean, that you show that to a Gen Xer today and they'll be laughing their ass off for days.
Yeah, it was basically like, shun, like, don't have like regular employment, stop working, and that kind of represents the entire, like, slack off, like the slack thing. Like,
Of the 90s.
don't do anything, don't work hard, sit back, your dreams are going to come true. Don't
You got to
worry,
preserve
guys.
that slack, right? You don't want to expend too much slack.
Yeah, and you're in the good hands of what did they call it? One of them was they have many deities. Like, I think one of them was Jehovah One. You're in the good hands of Jehovah One. Don't worry. You don't need to do anything. Just chill out, relax.
Yeah, you kind of see that a lot through that sort of 90s resurgence of hippieism. That was the same kind of idea. It's just like we can just slack off all day. And you got a lot of that in the modern left, too.
Oh, and also they believed that people were descended from Yetis and that like a Sasquatch.
Well, that makes sense.
Too. So, and
That
anyone
seems
that
reasonable.
but there was a group of people that wasn't descended from the Yetis, okay, and that they needed to eliminate those people that wasn't descended from the Yetis.
The
Got some
Pinkies.
Yeti on Yeti warfare, huh?
The Pink Men.
Anti-Yeti
That's
warfare.
what they called it. The Pink Men. And you always have to be fighting the Pink Men. Jeez. Well, this has been great. I loved having you guys on. We're right about an hour. So thank you for joining us, everybody. And I'll see you again on Thursday with lots of new emails. If you have a paranormal experience or an alien experience or anything that you want to talk about that was kind of weird, email me at headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com, and I will read it on the air with Nick on Thursday. Thank you all for coming. Guys, say goodbye. There you go.
This show's been Ion approved. This is